Greetings. I'm Untitled Chapter, and on behalf of our leadership team, I'm delighted to overview the goals of the SETS Resilience Convergence project. The project involves academic researchers and city stakeholders. During this presentation, you'll hear mostly from our leadership team pictured here, but also from our graduate students and postdocs. In the next few minutes, I'm going to describe our goals and general approach. There is a growing mountain of evidence that cities are vulnerable to climate change extreme events. There is also a rapidly expanding community focused on adaptation. Concurrently, there is increasing attention focused on cities as complex and dynamic systems composed of social, ecological, and technological dimensions that interact with each other and produce outcomes that are often difficult to predict. When we discuss the technological domain, we're referring to infrastructure as gray to green systems. These domains are each represented in various resilience fields. There are resilience theories to describe social, ecological, and technological resilience respectively, and the SES and STS communities also frame the concept. However, no field has converged social, ecological, and technological resilience theory into a coherent framework to support adaptation. As such, our core goal is addressing the question of how do SETS domains interact to generate vulnerability or resilience to climate-related extreme events? And how can urban SETS dynamics be guided along more resilient, equitable, and sustainable trajectories?
We view SETS convergence as necessary for identifying transformative pathways towards climate adaptation and developing comprehensive strategies to overcome barriers to achieve those pathways. We would argue that adaptation strategies that downweight or ignore a particular dimension are likely to produce unintended trade-offs, and their adaptation plans will be limited. We are grounding our project by embedding ourselves in 4 cities: Atlanta, New York, Phoenix, and San Juan. These cities represent a diversity of extreme climate events, infrastructure, ecology, people, and governance processes. An adaptation solution to flooding in Atlanta may not translate wholly to Phoenix, as SETS characteristics and dynamics will differ between the 2 cities. Furthermore, in each city, we partner with a diversity of stakeholders who help steer our research and support knowledge co-generation activities of transformative pathways. Now I'd like to describe our specific goals towards SETS convergence. In phase 1, our work has consisted of theory development, modeling and visualization, governance analysis, and scenario development in our 4 cities. These are the foundation of our phase 2 convergence goals. Together, these activities give us a convergence SETS theory by which to approach resilience and adaptation, commensurate city data by which to assess vulnerabilities in transformative pathways, insights into governance across scale, and future visions towards adaptation that utilize and navigate SETS. We'll describe these associated activities in depth in the research accomplishments section of this presentation. We view SETS deep convergence as a competency necessary for negotiating the increasingly complex social, ecological, and technological landscape that is climate adaptation. We argue that resilience efforts at silo strategies as 1 or 2 domains of SETS will likely be insufficient for the complexity of the adaptation challenges at hand. We look forward to detailing our phase 1 work and describing our phase 2 and project goals.
An important part of our convergence project is team building and network building. In this segment, I will describe how we have responded to the challenges of this difficult past year, but also responded to new opportunities, some of them brought about by the pandemic. When we began this SETS convergence project, we were 9 researchers across 5 institutions, the ones shown in pink text, and we've grown. Our research partnerships include students and postdocs on the project, as well as those who have joined our open network with interests in urban SETS resilience. We also have added city partners or expanded those partnerships that we already had through the UREX SRN. Some of our key partners are listed here from New York City, Atlanta, San Juan, and Phoenix. And then finally, we've been connecting our research network with other research networks. Of course, the urban SRNs, UREX and UWIN, but also a new network of networks on nature-based solutions for urban resilience, Natura, a network focused on data innovations, Sustain, our long-term practitioner partners, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and the San Juan Urban Long-Term Research Area, or ULTRA. So how are we organized, and how do we achieve our convergence objectives? Our leadership team, the original 9, meets weekly, and all of the participants together comprise our convergence team, which forms convergence working groups and collaborative research projects. You'll hear about some of these later. To bring it all together, we've been holding bi-weekly convergence capacity building meetings, which feature discussions on resilience, often with invited guests, progress updates, and team building activities. One important team building activity was the first of our diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops, which will provide a foundation for the SETS Convergence Code of Conduct. We workshopped these ideas with the entire team in this Miro board that you see on the lower right. Well, what have been some of the challenges and opportunities in this time of COVID? We have shifted many of our planned meetings and workshops to virtual formats, which has caused some delays, for instance, in Atlanta in initiating the full scenario workshops. However, we have accelerated some of our other activities. For example, modeling is ahead of schedule. And we've been able to build a strong database on SE and T dimensions for our cities, and even developed research on the impact of the pandemic on infrastructure, including green infrastructure in cities across the United States.
The roughly 43 researchers in the network, some funded and some unfunded, span 11 institutions and include 14 students and 7 postdocs. In our first 2 years, we've published 36 journal articles with many more in review, have conducted 32 network activities, including SETS Convergence capacity building discussions and city scenario visioning workshops, and have produced 59 non-journal products. We're now going to overview these research accomplishments. Our phase 1 activities on the left have centered on SETS theory, foundational modeling, city future scenario development, and SETS visualization advances. We're now going to overview the specific activities associated with our phase 1 work.
To start, Nancy is going to discuss our work on SETS resilience theory and vulnerability.
In this era of the Anthropocene, with its rapid change, interdependencies, and complexity, there's a strong need for converging social, ecological, and technological domains. Our theory development for SETS resilience builds on evolution of resilience concepts in ecology, social ecological systems, and to SETS, but we argue that we need technology as a separate domain, especially in cities. Meanwhile, parallel developments have been going on in engineering, moving from fail-safe to safe-to-fail to a sustainability resilience that incorporates adaptability and transformation. In an in-progress paper for PNAS, we trace this movement towards SETS resilience, from individual SE and T resilience to SE and ST that each downweight the missing domain, to SETS resilience with its capabilities of opening up the problem and solution space, converging diverse knowledges, and navigating the complexity of the Anthropocene. To build resilience, we need to understand where our systems are vulnerable. In this project, we look at vulnerability to flooding. We adopted metrics for exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity for each of the SE and T domains in 6 cities. And on the right, you can see clusters of S, E, and T vulnerability in Phoenix, Atlanta, and Miami. But note that these clusters rarely overlap. So the map at the bottom left shows us the overlap between the S, E, and T and the dual domains. Given this lack of overlap, a focus on just 1 or 2 domains will misrepresent SETS vulnerability for the system as a whole.
Thanks, Nancy. Now we're going to walk you through our core activities. These activities cover modeling, future visioning, and resilience governance.
So we are also building convergence with our city partners through the use of co-production of future scenarios as a tool to build SETS resilience. In this example of San Juan, we held visioning workshops with various stakeholders and brought diverse expertise on the social, ecological, and technological aspects of the city to explore very long-term adaptive and transformative futures and develop the SETS strategies needed to get there. We use story maps as a platform to visualize and communicate the various quantitative and qualitative outputs that were co-produced and the knowledges and perspective necessary for understanding the city. For all our cities, we expect that these visioning workshops facilitate convergence by opening up the climate resilient problem space and by exploring potential resilience strategies through creative and innovative activities. So one of our efforts to take stocks of our cities is to characterize the network of actors governing climate resilience and what are their capacities as an entry point into understanding overall adaptive capacity of cities as SETS. So as an example, in this slide, we show the network of organizations that are active in resilience initiatives in Atlanta. And the colors around the nose show the different S, E, and T domains that they work is focused on, and the size of the node reflects their role as network leaders. So with this approach, we can identify the key organizations that have the capacity to help lead transitions towards SETS resilience and the necessary partnerships that are needed to break institutional boundaries and encourage collaboration across silos.
We've developed a cutting-edge urban system land change model for modeling future visions that uses the qualitative stakeholder inputs from those workshops to drive our machine learning cellular automata land use model. We first used the machine learning from past land use transitions to build a business as usual future scenario. Then we translate the qualitative visions from those workshops into rules to govern the model, which produces future land use and land cover states for every cell that matches those visions. This gives us the ability to quantitatively compare and contrast outcomes of co-produced scenarios like these in San Juan. We're working now to incorporate LiDAR and ortho imagery to increase resolution to 4 meters or less, more appropriate for dense urban areas, also adding population sociodemographic models on top of these to allow for a SETS convergence analysis of how social, ecological, and infrastructural changes in the future will separately and together impact future land use and land cover.
We have also built and tested an integrated urban futures climate risk modeling suite that uses the qualitative visions that are projected through urban systems land change as land cover and land use inputs to drive our hydrological and urban heat exposure models. This allows us to compare business as usual projections to alternative futures to assess how stakeholder visions impact future heat, coastal flood, and urban flooding risks. The integrated modeling suite is the first of its kind and builds on the state-of-the-art urbanized WRF model with an urban canopy parameterization that accounts for urban environment physical processes like anthropogenic heat, shadowing, and heat storage. This allows us to compare how alternative scenarios impact future heat exposure to S, E, and T subsystems in each city. We also bring a new city cat surface flow hydrology model into our modeling suite that is similarly driven by land change model outputs. This then generates future flood extent and depth maps for each co-produced scenario based on a range of rainfall scenarios that match historic and future potential moderate and extreme rainfall events.
One of the challenges that we knew we'd face early on is that of unavailability of data, making sure that we had consistent infrastructure data across our 4 cities. And in that regard, we have developed synthetic models to estimate power, water, networks, as well as their connections to buildings, their socioeconomics, and transportation services. On the left here, you see our synthetic water model in action, estimating the pipe network under New York City. On the right, you see Atlanta and the final product. And ultimately, we're using these models to assess scenarios of failure. So here we have Staten Island in New York. A hurricane like Sandy disables a substation, which ultimately results in a cascading failure across both the power and water networks. We're using these synthetic models ultimately to support decision-making, ultimately how we might deploy resilience strategies around infrastructure through a SETS lens going forward. Now that we've described our core SETS activities, we're going to show some of our efforts to characterize dynamics.
Our student-led project, Interdependence of Social, Ecological, Technological Systems, Consequences from an Extreme Precipitation Event, uses the SETS framework to understand and explore dynamic, interconnected, and interdependent relationships within urban systems, as demonstrated by the figure presented on the screen, which is an initial pass at mapping this network. By assessing social, ecological, and technological relationships, we identify feedback loops, pathways of disruption, and cascading failures, providing insights into new ways to protect infrastructure from extreme events from an interdisciplinary perspective. While we focus on extreme precipitation events in Phoenix, the approach is expandable to other cities and climate disasters to enhance urban resilience. And now back to Timon.
Thanks, Alicia. That complexity is exactly what we're trying to visualize in our data visualization platform, which is a place for both converging data streams and also bringing scientific results to engagement as a decision support tool and also for enhancing science communication. The Dataviz platform is an interactive web application to enhance SETS understanding of each of the GCR cities. This was initially developed in the UREX Sustainable Research Network, and in phase 1 of this project, we've added additional map layers to delineate synthetic power water infrastructure, as Mike was talking about, added digital elevation models and buildings across the cities to provide location detail and also context for SETS indicators, and adding features where we can compare and contrast across the map layers at any stage. So now we're working on integrating the future by bringing in the modeled outputs of heat and future flood risk of those different scenarios that are developed in the cities to look at the impacts for resilience in our decision-making.
Now we'd like to talk to you about some additional products and their impact. So the first are 2 books that we've produced. The first on resilient urban futures, which includes about 20 to 30 contributors talking about SETS futures and future thinking. And the other is on urban infrastructure thinking at 2100, where about 40 infrastructure experts across various SETS domains have come together to imagine infrastructure at the end of the century. Furthermore, we've launched an Infrastructure in the Anthropocene podcast series. So far, we've released 3 podcasts between March and April, with 2 more coming on scenarios. Now I'm going to hand it over to Timon, who's going to talk about the EKOS game.
In addition to books and journal articles, we've also developed a multiplayer board game, EKOS, The Path to Resilience, that challenges a group of community members to come together and envision a more equitable and sustainable EKOS in the face of climate change and other challenges. Working cooperatively to complete challenges earns you sustainability, equity, and resilience points. We designed EKOS with the goal of creating a playful platform for students and diverse stakeholders to discuss and learn together in a collaborative gaming environment about issues of urban resilience, climate governance, and community-based co-design.
Now we are going to talk about our convergence accomplishments. Tisha and I will give some examples of our convergence evolution conceptually and through capacity building as a team and in practice. Our project has continued to utilize the tool shared with us at the first PI meeting to assess our convergence evolution. Building on previous collaborations, we started as a strong team in the collaborative multidisciplinarity working space, which you can see in gray, such that we could easily collaborate and share expertise across disciplines. Through our work in the SETS Convergence project over the last 1.5 years, we've moved into the emerging convergence space in green, in which we are creating new frameworks and language to solve societal problems together. We are now on our way to consolidating convergence and deep convergence through productive, integrated teams that are essential for emerging new insights that are greater than the sum of their individual disciplinary parts. For example, our overarching framework draws on and requires an integrated understanding of cities as interdependent, complex systems across different domains. This framework is essential for the advancement of the convergent urban system science that we are developing in the project. It also necessitates that our collaborations are not just interdisciplinary, but transdisciplinary to bridge across research and practice to have societal impacts with convergent, systems-oriented solutions. You also saw examples of this in the previous research accomplishment section, in which we are working toward convergence conceptually through the integration of methods, frameworks, and theory. For example, Nancy described how we were bridging different disciplinary perspectives, including social ecological systems, science technology studies, and engineering infrastructure framings of resilience, not necessarily to develop a new singular SETS urban resilience theory or definition, but to emphasize and leverage the strengths across the domains and theories that emerge from the integration of these different perspectives. In this project thus far, 30% of our publications have come from teams that represent all SETS domains, and we expect that this percentage will continue to grow as the project continues to evolve. And while we see this convergence from an academic perspective, we've also been exploring how practitioners and organizations doing related work in our study cities frame resilience. On the right is a figure representing responses to a survey in which these practitioners and organizations were asked to describe a resilient future of their city. A large majority, 74% of the responses, described resilience from a single domain, either as social resilience or from an ecological or infrastructure perspective of resilience. And only about a quarter of the responses integrated 2 or more dimensions, and less than 5% framed resilience in terms of all 3 SETS dimensions. So this highlights a baseline of perspectives in our cities, but it also helps us to understand where and how the SETS framework for resilience can be put into practice in our collaborations with practitioners. We've been building capacity for convergence through different mechanisms in the project. We started in phase 1 with a focus on domain-specific working groups in which we are taking stock and have already integrated these working groups across domains to meet our research goals and to be prepared for phase 2 convergence activities. Another central mechanism are the convergence capacity building meetings that Nancy described earlier. As a main goal of these meetings, we are making space to identify not just the commonalities, but also the tensions in our work, and more importantly, to develop trust and a team relationship in which we can focus on epistemic pluralism. To assess our progress toward convergence as a team, we use the same survey instrument that was developed by the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative to understand our team members' perceptions about the essential elements of convergence research. We found many areas of consensus, but most notably that a significant majority agreed that all disciplines are equally important to the project's success, and also that the process of convergence research is really just as important as the attention to the research outcomes. And so for this reason, and for all of the other reasons that convergence goals are so important, we plan to continue to emphasize our convergence capacity building throughout phase 2.
Thanks, Elizabeth. As a way of assessing the impact that our research activities and practice are having on our convergence development, we're tracking the connections and interactions of our team using social network analysis tools. This involved asking all 43 participants in the network about their collaborations with other members in regular research activities. The image here shows all members of our network as nodes and the connections between them. As you can see, our network shows a high level of connectivity across team members, and this is regardless of their position in the network, so that in addition to researchers interacting with other researchers from other disciplines, you have researcher-student connection, student postdoc connections, and so on. We also see a high connectivity across SETS domains. Similar to the network figure I showed earlier for Atlanta, the nodes have different colors according to their SETS domains that best represent their research area or field. And so you can see that it is a very diverse network in this respect, and that connections are happening across the domain. We also expect that as we move forward into phase 2, that network will change and it will become more diverse as we add more researchers and as we include our city practitioners and bring in more expertise in our phase 2 activities. For instance, on the left, we show how Elvia Melendez Ackerman, an ecologist from the University of Puerto Rico, recently joined our network, and as the image on the right shows, currently has connection with team members that are more similar to her. But we expect that her connections will expand and be more diverse as she builds relationship with other researchers, working in other domains, so she'll have more nodes of different colors, and with practitioners from other cities other than San Juan, where she works. You can also imagine this happening with our city partners as we engage them during phase 2, and then we expect them to be more connected with other researchers, but also with practitioners from other cities. And that way we're also expect to build these practitioner-to-practitioner networks. Our plan is to repeat this assessment every year as a way to measure our interactions, how they've changed over time, and how we're sustaining them over the course of the project. Finally, as we have mentioned earlier in this presentation, we're building convergence in our cities through various transdisciplinary approaches, like the co-production of future scenarios. As we described in our research accomplishments, these activities are resulting in various practical outputs and strategies that are being or will be incorporated into planning processes happening in our cities, like the New York City Climate Adaptation Roadmap, for instance. But our goal here is to also encourage convergence within our cities and build the kind of SETS capability that Nancy described earlier, and which are illustrated here by the integration of these colored ribbons through pathways. So in addition to practical solutions, we strive to help cities navigate the complexity of climate extreme events and to shift their conceptualization of a resilient city that is now largely fragmented, referring back to the figure Elizabeth highlighted, toward future system states that already integrate these SETS domains and chart truly transformative pathways towards desired futures and away from dystopian or unsustainable futures. And the way that we started this in phase 1 and are ramping up in phase 2 is by bringing together multiple sectors, perspective, and knowledges, along with our synthetic frameworks, data, and models developed in phase 1, into spaces where together we can co-learn, envision, and plan already through a SETS lens. Our hypothesis is that these convergence interventions will generate a more integrated, anticipatory, and responsible process than business as usual, because it will allow participants to identify blind spots in the understanding, explore unintended consequences of their proposed solutions, while at the same time ensuring equitable benefits. Finally, we expect these activities will create sort of institutional networks necessary to govern and sustain these transitions over time. Now I will pass it on to David Iwaniak, who will describe our plans for phase 2.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Tisha. So the research and convergence accomplishments that you've seen are to meet phase 1 objectives. However, you probably noticed that a number of the activities point to work we are starting in phase 2. So in the second phase, we will be building on and using the research from phase 1 to guide urban SETS dynamics along more resilient, equitable, and sustainable trajectories. So central to this work is our network of practitioners and researchers. And as we move from phase 1 to phase 2, the convergence setting, that is who we engage with and how, this also evolves. Since the start of the project, there's been an emphasis on convergence among our S, E, and T researchers, which we will continue to deepen. In phase 2, we strengthen and build capacity for convergence among our practitioners and researchers within each of our city teams. And in year 3, we start adding cross-city SETS learning activities. In phase 2, we are adding assessment and transition labs to move toward deep convergence. We're building from the work in phase 1 of taking stock of SETS knowledge and co-developing pathways that envision transformative change. So in the assessment labs, we will evaluate those pathways and identify what are the capacities that are needed to adapt and transform. And in the transition labs, we're fostering and building those capacities, anticipatory convergence and SETS capacities for more resilient cities. Here's one example of the assessment labs in phase 2 that we are preparing in order to evaluate and stress test a scenario pathway. So we're bringing together a subset of the climate resilience stakeholders, in this case, infrastructure managers and decision makers in the city of Atlanta. We're also bringing together the work on synthetic power and water infrastructure, urban ecological infrastructure, knowledge system and governance, and SETS vulnerability to explore the multi-jurisdictional responses, SETS interventions, and potential implications with these infrastructure managers in the assessment labs. We've also begun work developing our transition labs. Here, the emphasis is on fostering and building capacity for more resilient cities. In New York, we're working with the Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency to integrate the scenario visioning into their upcoming climate adaptation roadmap. Similarly, in Atlanta, we're working with CAP to develop Atlanta's sustainability plan, and in the city of Phoenix on the climate action plan. To highlight just one example, in San Juan, we are working with Alianza, a coalition of agencies, NGOs, scientists, and residents to integrate the co-produced flood resilient visions into various transition labs to specify the actors, partnerships, and actions needed to build a pathway towards sustainable and integrated watershed management in the context of a post-disaster recovery. In phase 2, for the SETS data visualization platform, we will bring qualitative data from the co-produced scenario work, along with new synthetic infrastructure model outputs, and integrate LiDAR point cloud and other quantitative data into our 3D database platform. This will enhance the science communication and leverage decision support tools already in use by our practitioners for real impact on policy and planning. Also, early in phase 2 for DataViz, this summer we will release our board game EKOS in time for more than a dozen fall 2021 undergrad and graduate level courses. We will test the board games as well in our labs and are excited about making this more widely available. In fall 2021, we also plan to launch the beta version of our Climate Equity XR app that's been in development since the start of phase 1. The Climate Equity XR app provides interactive maps and 3D visualizations of heat, flood, and other climate risk indicators. It experiments with augmented reality layers that allows you to project interactive maps and explore your urban environment from wherever you are in the city. This will help enhance engagement on issues of climate justice and will enhance the broader impacts of our convergence science. With our network of stakeholders and academic partners, we'll be able to get closer to deep convergence in urban climate resilience. In phase 2, we will build SETS convergence, not just within our academic team, but also through the assessment and transition labs. We will build SETS convergence within cities with our city network partners.